This is Blue Lift, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the underrepresented Democratic voices in Tennessee, working tirelessly to bring progressive change to the volunteer state. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
That's right. From grassroots organizers to community leaders, from urban centers to rural towns, we'll highlight the diverse perspectives and powerful voices that often go unheard. Join us as we lift up the blue wave and shine a light on the path toward a more inclusive and equitable Tennessee. Again, I'm your host, Peggy Kingsbury, and this is Blue Lift, where every voice matters. Let's get started. Friends, I am so excited today. We have with us Justin Kanew. A lot of you probably know that name, but I'm going to share some things about Justin you might not know. Justin is a producer of multi-million-dollar films. I didn't know this till I did a little research and checking. He's been a contestant on The Amazing Race, I believe twice. He's a graduate of Northwestern University. And most of you know Justin as the founder of the Tennessee Holler. He's also a prior candidate for office, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And he's a husband and a dad and lives here in Middle Tennessee. Justin, welcome to Blue Lift.
Thanks for having me, Peggy.
I'm so excited to have you here. I want to just dive right in, and I want to ask you, why the Tennessee Holler? How'd that get started? What's it about?
Well, I guess the origin story of the Holler starts with running for Congress. I ran against Marsha Blackburn when she was a state representative, when she was in Congress before she became a senator, and I lost to Mark Green. And after I lost that contested general election, I just wanted to stay involved in the conversation. I wanted to, stay in the national argument that we're having. And it felt like there just wasn't really a counterbalance to the Tennessee Star at the time, which is basically Tennessee's version of Breitbart.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like there was anybody pushing out, what I believe to be the truth about what's going on in Tennessee. We're at the bottom in infant maternal mortality, at the bottom in poverty, crime, bottom in per pupil spending. And that story just wasn't being told. So instead of sitting around and waiting for the Tennessean to hand us the microphone, it felt like someone needed to build a new sound system. And that's kind of what the Holler is. So we launched it in 2019. One of the very first things that happened was we sort of participated in the downfall of Glenn Cassida, who was my representative at the time, who was the shortest serving speaker in Tennessee history. And through all that, we sort of realized that, there was space for a voice like the Hollers and that we could have a real impact in the community. So that's how we started.
Fantastic. And we're so glad that you started the Holler, because you all have broken some very important stories, and you've also given voice to a lot of causes that many Tennesseans wouldn't have even talked about or known about. And, it just amazes me when you were listing the ways in which we are last. We are also last in voting. The number of people who vote.
Those are related.
It's such a low percentage, and it's just so sad. And I do know they're related. And of course, in my mind, I think if we're last in all these other things, why aren't people feeling some pain and getting out and voting? But those two things seem to go hand in hand. I guess, is there a defeatism? What causes that?
Yeah, I think it's a stew of, defeatism, inevitability, a lack of effort on the part of the state to lift up voting, and an intensive effort to push it down. Trey Hargett, the Secretary of State, if I was in charge of something where we were dead last year after, that's all right. That might be Trey Hargett. If I was dead last at something that I was in charge of year after year after year, they'd probably replace me. But you don't see any push by Republicans to get Trey Hargett replaced, even though we're at the bottom in voter turnout. And what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is he's doing a good job in their eyes. They don't actually want people voting. So, when we don't vote, we get the results that you're talking about. We get high crime, we get poverty, because we get people in office that don't actually care about changing those things. And so it's all related. If I had a silver bullet for why people don't turn out, I'd be a wealthy man. I don't know the real specific answer to that, but I do know that the only way to fix it starts with awareness. It starts with telling the story about what's really happening in our state, and that's what we're trying to do.
And that is certainly what the Tennessee Holler does. Absolutely. And I think you're right about all of what you just said. I've done some work with the Election Commission in Williamson County. I've worked the polls, and I go to the Election Commission meetings, which very few people attend, but they should, because the things that are discussed are very important to us, and there are always people there who want to have their citizen time to speak, which they should, who want to limit voting even further. And that just really shocks me when I hear what they say. And of course, they're backing it up with things that aren't true. They've fallen prey to every conspiracy theory out there. And so they come to the Election Commission to say that, we have to limit the number of people who vote because these things are going on. Well, none of those things are going on. But
right. Well, and that's what happens when, people don't vote. The people who don't want you to vote benefit from you not voting.
Right.
They're the ones that benefit from us not having programs that help people with health care, not investing in per pupil spending, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's tough to get people to understand that, there's a direct correlation between turnout and results. But if you look at what's going on in other states, for instance, everybody's talking about Minnesota because of Tim Walz as the pick for VP now. And if you look at the programs that they passed, school lunches for kids, health care, higher wages, and on and on and on, we suffer from our apathy.
Yes.
And it's hard to get the word out about that because there is sort of this feeling that no matter what I do, Tennessee's a red state anyway, so why should I bother to take the 20 minutes of my day to go vote? And it's tough. I don't have the answer. We've been looking for it ever since I moved here. Hopefully one day it'll wake up. But what I will say is we have an election coming up in November. Gloria Johnson's at the top of the ticket. She's an exciting candidate. Well, Kamala is at the top, and Trump, obviously that helps too. But we also have a Senate candidate that is running a real campaign that people know, that has a national presence. That's the first time that's really happened since I've lived here on the Democratic side. So it'll be interesting to see, what the numbers look like come November.
Yes, very much so. So I want to sort of piggyback on what you've just said because when you ran for office before, I know you had 3 things in your platform that were really, really important. And I want to talk about, have any changes been made in those 3 areas? So the first one was health care. Since 2018, what have you seen?
Well, at the time, expanding Medicaid was a pretty serious part of the discussion. Tennessee was one of the few states that refused to expand Medicaid. We were losing billions of dollars a year as a result, and we still haven't expanded Medicaid. So I think the total that we've lost of our own dollars is probably close to $30 billion now.
It's just unbelievable.
So we're still number 1 in medical bankruptcies. We're at the bottom in maternal and infant mortality. So our results are really not good, and there's no good reason for it. I mean, you've had even Republicans, Sam Whitson thinks we should expand Medicaid. So this isn't a partisan issue. There's mayors all across Tennessee, especially in places like McNairy County, that have lost their hospitals.
Right.
So, the results are very clear. There's a clear, direct tie between us not expanding Medicaid and us having bad health outcomes, losing hospitals, and people dying all over the place. So in terms of Medicaid expansion, which I think is emblematic of the lack of concern in our state, no, not much has happened. And I would encourage anybody that thinks this isn't a serious issue. There's a group called Remote Area Medical, and they used to go to third world countries to give free health care to third world countries. Well, they set up shop in Tennessee a few years back, and the need was so great in Tennessee that now they come here like 2 or 3 times a year. And I encourage anybody to go to Remote Area Medical when they set up in Knoxville or Columbia, which is where they did when I went and saw them.
Not very far from here.
And you will see Tennesseans sleeping in the parking lot starting at midnight the night before, lining up at 5 a.m. to get in just to see a doctor that can look at their eyes or look at their teeth or look at whatever else. And if you talk to them, they're not thinking about partisanship. They're not thinking about Republican, Democrat. They're just thinking about getting health care. So that's a place where you can see the direct correlation between our lack of concern for our citizens in Tennessee and the results. And it's really eye-opening.
Wow. That's something else. And one of the other things that you talked about in 2018 that was important to you, and I know that it still is, that's rural broadband. What's happened there?
Well, rural broadband, I think there have been a few pushes to expand it. There Biden infrastructure bill, I think, included some rural broadband expansion that every single Tennessee Republican voted against and now is taking credit for.
Yes.
But there was also a sort of complicated situation that it's been hard to kind of explain to people. But the telecoms, AT&T, they came in when there was a push to expand rural broadband and spent a lot of money to get people like Mark Green at the time, who was a state senator, basically to not allow these rural co-ops to compete with the AT&Ts of the world. So there are these rural co-ops that want to do basically what happened in Chattanooga, but for rural Tennessee. And the AT&Ts of the world came in and they rigged the game to make sure that they weren't going to have that kind of competition in those areas, because it doesn't really make them a lot of money to expand into those areas because they have to build out to serve so few people.
Right.
So they don't want to have to do that, but they also don't want these rural co-ops to create these low-cost alternatives for those areas.
Right.
So it's been this really political situation where you have vested interests in not giving us universal broadband, which is what we need. And this is where programs like this, the only way to really fulfill them is to subsidize them through the government, which we did with highways, which we did with electricity, which we do with water. So, and anytime you want the government to do stuff like that, it gets dismissed as socialism. But the truth is, those people that are calling it socialism, they partake in socialism driving to work every day. Exactly.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Rural broadband, I think we've made maybe a little more progress than healthcare, but still, that's a situation where, for the wrong reasons, we're not just solving the problem.
I agree, and it's just so important to the health of an area when people have all the same access to basically the world that the rest of us have, and it can really slow the growth of an area. And then you couple that with the healthcare issue where you may not have a rural hospital, or, for example, in Marshall County where I have a business, the healthcare gap is shockingly huge, and there's very little dental care, vision care. These things are very important to people's overall
important.
health.
And I think what you're getting at here is, to me, like at the core of really the issue, especially in Tennessee, but in the country, when you don't have healthcare in these areas, when you don't have broadband in these areas, they can't compete. And so what happens? You have your kids graduate, and what's the first thing they do?
They get out as quickly as they can.
Exactly. So they leave, so you don't have a talent pool there to grow the town. You see this towns dying in town squares all across Tennessee. And so what ends up happening is you have a lot of people in rural America that are really angry about that. They're really angry about it. They feel left behind. And so now they're taking it out on, immigrants, on people that really are not at the root of that issue. What's at the root of that issue is corporate greed and corrupt politicians that won't do the right thing and help. And we could have a much stronger situation in rural America if we actually cared enough to get past those issues.
I agree. And these disparities also, I have a master's degree in criminal justice. And so these disparities are part of the causation for crime. There's the strain theory that when people are under strain, this is what happens. Yeah. And so these disparities, and I believe also systemic racism plays a huge role in all of these things. And you see communities begin to fall apart. And, that is then when addiction becomes even a bigger problem. Thank you, Marsha Blackburn. The third thing that you were interested in 2018, and I know you still are, is veterans' rights. Have you seen any progress in that area?
Veterans' rights, I think that's one that both parties definitely try to value a little bit, although we just saw Trump yesterday say that, the medal that he gave to his billionaire donor is actually better than the medal that injured soldiers get.
I
can't believe he said that.
I was just shocked by that. And then he had to say, because she's pretty.
Right.
Oh, my Lord.
But the thing about it is, veterans actually are touched by all the issues that we're talking about.
Yes.
Veterans, not expanding Medicaid has left tens of thousands of Tennessee veterans without health care. Not legalizing medical marijuana really hurts veterans. And actually, I had veterans that supported me that were Republicans only because I was for legalizing medical marijuana and Mark Green was not. And that's a situation where you have a lot of veterans who are depending on opioids because there's no alternative to their pain that they experience from all the symptoms that they bring home with them. So, veterans are just people just like us. So they deal with all of the issues that we talk about. As far as like a concerted effort to help just veterans, Another thing was I think it was the PACT Act, which was helping veterans that were suffering from the inhalation that they were near, like these burning tar pits in
Correct.
Afghanistan and Iraq. And, Marcia, I think ultimately voted for it, but she voted against it coming to a vote. There were like 3 votes along the way, and she was on the wrong side of a couple of them. So there's a lot more that we need to do for veterans, obviously. But, first and foremost, we need people in office who, don't resist the idea of government as a way to help people, which ultimately is what we're talking about here. We elect Republicans to office in Tennessee and nationally who generally don't believe in the idea that the government is a positive thing and here to help ever. They vilify government, and they do it, to benefit the people that put them in office, that pay for their campaigns.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So let me ask you, are you a journalist or an activist?
It's a great question. I would say both. Kind of depends who you ask. The press corps here in Tennessee would say I'm not a journalist. They would call me an activist. They don't let me in the press corps. They voted unanimously against me twice. They say I'm biased. I say they're biased. I think they have a bias also. They just don't acknowledge it. We at the Holler, we admit that we're progressive. We're committed to ideals like people having health care, public education, equality, equal rights, not bullying people, higher wages for workers, unions. We're committed to those things. Do we break stories too? Yeah, we do. So what is a journalist? I think there's a strong argument to be made that all journalists should be activists in a way, activists for the truth, activists for change for good. And I don't really see a lot of value in a publication both sidesing everything and not letting their people know where the truth really lies. There is a truth in this world.
That's
there are
right.
truths. And I think Christian Amanpour recently said, be truthful, not neutral. And that really rang true for me and for us at the Holler. Now, are there times where I am openly advocating for either a candidate that I like or, for policy ideas that we like? Yes. Does that make me an activist? Sure. If that's what you want it to make me, that's fine. But we don't lie. We tell the truth. If we get something wrong, we fix it. Do we have a perspective? Yes. What is a journalist? I would put that back on people. To me, it's people who try to tell people the truth about what's going on in their community, and we do that.
I would agree with that, and I think certainly one can be both. The activism part of what you engage in is probably where a really horrible incident happened to you and your family. Your home was shot at. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't talk about it too much, but I will just say that, yes, that did happen. No, we don't know why. Obviously, when we speak up at the Holler, there are people who disagree with us, and I would imagine it had something to do with that.
What was the big story that was going on around the time that happened? Do you remember?
I remember, yeah. I mean, at the time, the timing of it was Covenant happened, and obviously that was a tragedy. And then the next day, I went to the Capitol to ask our legislators what they were going to do about it. And it really felt like business as usual the next day in the Capitol, in the legislature. I mean, it was sickening. And so I went around and I asked, probably 30 representatives what they were going to do about it, and none of them had good answers. And then I posted a video of that. And then 3 days later, I don't remember which happened first, but I think what happened to us happened 3 days later. And then, yeah, that's what happened, because I actually wasn't there for the 2 days after that was when the Justins went to the well.
Gotcha.
And Gloria went to the well. And then the next day or the day after that, I think, was what happened to us. And then the following week was the expulsions. And I actually wasn't there for that because of what had happened. So, though that's a long way of saying it was all happening around Covenant, around the discussion around gun violence in our communities. And, that happened to us. It was horrible, really shook my family up. And,
I'm sure it did.
Thankfully, everybody's okay. But, we still are dealing with the echoes of that to this day.
It's just shocking to me. It would be like you reporting on a bunch of arsons and then somebody sets fire to your home.
That's exactly right.
And so there's a direct tie there. And I know that was very frightening for your family. Did you think about stopping at that point?
Yes.
Are you still thinking about stopping? No, not right now. I mean, thinking about it, it's a tough question.
it still weighs on my family. And to
I'm
me,
sure
that's the most important thing. But yeah, did think about that, did think about leaving, all of that. But at the end of the day, we love Tennessee. We love being here despite all its quirks and flaws. My kids are happy, proud of my wife. And, this is where we live. This is our home. So we didn't want to let whoever that was chase us away. And, life goes on. I don't wish ill upon anybody, even the people that we disagree with vehemently, that we report on all the time, that we try to hold accountable. I don't wish ill on anybody. And, I will say there was one Republican legislator that called me to say, I'm sorry that happened. I hope you're okay. And his name is William Lamberth, and he deserves some credit for that.
Wow. That's interesting. That's good to know. Good to know. Well, good on William Lamberth for that.
Wouldn't have expected it.
No. So, talking about some of these legislators that you've spoken to, which interview has surprised you the most?
Surprised me? Let me see. I mean, they're past the point of really surprising me. I have come to just kind of expect to be disappointed by these guys all the time.
Well, but I mean, what I'm getting at is, sometimes you'll go in and I'll see video where you talk to someone and they say this stuff that we think they're going to say, but then sometimes somebody says something and it goes viral.
Goes viral.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't stop and talk to me very much. What I've sort of learned is if you ask them the right question, their answer doesn't matter that much. If they run away, they run away. If they stop and talk and, agree with you, great. If they disagree, okay. But the question is the most important thing, and you only get so much time. Cameron Sexton is pretty easily triggered, so that's always a little surprising.
He sure is.
Like, he does his best to keep me out of his press conferences, but he always seems to want to lash out when he sees me in the hallways or whatever. So, that's always a little bit surprising. Scott Sapicki saying the thing he said about, throwing the public education system in the trash. He's always willing to say something. Surprising is a weird word. I don't really know.
Well, you may have had a run-in with Jack Johnson where
that was good.
He might have called you a jackass.
Jack Johnson called me a jackass. Yeah, Jack Johnson, for years wouldn't say a word to me. And then one day he flipped on me and he called me a jackass. And I was pretty excited because I was like, hey, look, my senator finally talked to me.
What were you asking him about? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't
remember what I was saying that day. No, I don't. But I talked to Jack,
which is kind of interesting because he took all the air out of the room for anything else. Now we just know he called you a jackass.
That's right. But what I will say, I want to talk to them. I really do. Like, if Brent Taylor stopped and talked to me.
Oh, he gave you a long conversation.
15 minutes. I was talking to Brent Taylor. This was, a month ago. If they stop and talk, I will talk to them. People always say, why are you always yelling at their backs? Because they won't stop and talk to me. I would prefer to have a conversation. Even Governor Lee will take my questions in his press conferences for the most part. There was a time when he wouldn't after I showed him a yearbook picture of himself in drag. But I know. But since that's worn off.
That was special and you had to do that.
Right. Sexton won't let me in his press conferences. So, he's a coward for that. Governor Lee at least take my questions.
So let's go down just a little bit deeper into a couple of things. Let's talk about the voucher situation. Okay. What's your prediction for what may happen when they come back in session?
I really don't know. I mean, my prediction wouldn't be much good because I would have told you they were going to pass last session.
Oh, really?
I really absolutely thought there was no chance that they weren't going to pass.
What do you think happened that made them not pass? Was it they were actually listening to the voters or no?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think really to me, if I had to pinpoint one thing, I would say it was those 60 plus resolutions that passed from school boards across the state.
Oh, wow.
That were saying we don't want this. I think that really sent a message to the people that these are a scam and will help mostly wealthy families that are already in private school and will really hurt public schools. Their line that, this isn't going to hurt public schools, I think people saw right through that. I think a lot of people speaking up, I'd like to hope we played our part. Todd Warner deserves a lot of credit, a Republican who was very vocally opposed to these things. The Democrats spoke up. So, I don't know that there was necessarily one thing, But because it had passed in other states and we could see the impact that it was having on their budgets and schools closing and them cutting teachers and programs, there was a lot that we could point to and say, no, they're lying.
Right.
This is what's going to happen in public schools. And oh, by the way, this is a part of Governor Lee's privatization effort, which is really his main priority ever since he came into office. So, now they brought in $5 million in out-of-state money to primary Republicans to get Republicans who theoretically will support the vouchers into office. Is 4 votes enough? It didn't sound like it was going to be enough by the end of last session. We were told only like 22 of them were supporting it in the House. So is 4 votes going to be enough? I don't know.
Well, do you think that and I agree with you, I wonder if the 4 votes will be enough. They're obviously beholden, and so they probably will vote for it. But do you think there will be a lot of pressure and or retaliation against the rest who would have voted against it to move over and vote for it? Or will the bill be changed substantively?
Well, I think there will be a lot of pressure. Governor Lee, I think it was like the Senate wanted to just pass the vouchers, and then the House was like, well, if we're going to do that, we need to pass like all this other stuff. And, that was their way of justifying in their head that they weren't hurting public schools because, we're doing this other stuff. So how much of the other stuff is the Senate going to let into the bill? I think that's kind of the question. That's the push and pull we're going to see. But at the end of the day, if they include vouchers, it's going to hurt public schools. And so I think people just need to be crystal clear about that no vouchers. And, the voucher students in Memphis and Nashville that are already in existence are not performing better. No. So it's not about the kids. We see what's going on in these other states. So, at the end of the day, the arguments against it are still going to be the same arguments against it. And now, people are seeing that we can push back and defeat it. So, I kind of hope they bring it back and have it go down in flames again. And this is what Governor Lee is going to be remembered for.
I think you're right. And I'm also intrigued and perplexed, I will say, that many of them who are now running for re-election are still saying they're for vouchers, even knowing their own school systems are against them and their constituents are against them. So to me, that says there must be a lot of money somewhere, because I always say follow the money.
Oh, it's completely about the money. I mean, if you look at the $5 million that came in those few races, like it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when you think about the fact that, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled toward these private, mostly religious schools, this law and the dam breaking. I mean, what they want is nothing short of a dismantling of public education so that these funds can go to private schools. It's absolutely a money grab. There's no question about it. And it has been, from the beginning.
I know that locally, of course, we had a race in Williamson County that was heavily affected by the voucher issue because Lee Reeves, the winner of that race by 95 votes, was heavily supported by, Prosperity? What's the name of that group?
Americans for Prosperity.
Yeah, Americans for Prosperity, which means they're for their prosperity, but not anyone else's. And they put $1 million into this really small race and just blew it up.
And barely won.
And barely won, which is a good thing, but still, he did win. It was a 3-way race, which I think played into it.
Yep.
Do you think if the third candidate had not been in it, if Michelle Foreman had not been in it, the loss would have been greater for Beathard?
Yeah, I think probably she was taking away from Reeves and not Beathard. So I think she probably helped Beathard.
I do too, but that really surprises me. I was really surprised by the outcome. The low voter turnout, really plays into that 95 votes.
And also, along those lines, that 1776 PAC, which is basically how Moms for Liberty rebranded, the 1776 PAC out of New York, they spiked the football about the 5 races that they won in Tennessee. 4 were Williamson County School Board seats,
right,
and 1 was a Wilson County School Board seat. So, even though Lee Reeves only won by 100 votes, and that's problematic, I think the real damage is going to come with these school board members that are now coasting in on the back of this, extremist PAC's money and wave. And that's another reason that people really need to pay attention to these races, because it's going to affect your schools. It's going to affect your kids.
I
it's
think,
not just the vouchers. It's the book bans. It's the teachers. It's the truth. this is what's coming for our schools. So, if people don't wake up and get out there and vote, pretty soon they're going to have their kids in a situation they don't want them to be in.
I agree. And I think that I've looked at the numbers and the makeup of the Williamson County School Board now, and they may very well have the votes to do some scary things right out of the chute.
For sure. Rutherford County Schools is dealing with all of this right now. They just had multiple vouchers or charter schools forced into their community by a rigged appeal board that Governor Lee put in place. This week, they're going to be voting on a bunch of books. Wicked, they might ban.
Saw that.
They might ban Toni Morrison's beloved Homegoing. So, these are ridiculous books to be trying to ban from our schools. And it's just the tip of the iceberg.
I agree. And I do think in Williamson County, there will probably be a motion to get rid of the director of our schools.
That's probably coming. I think that's going to be coming in Wilson County to Jeff Luttrell, who's the superintendent of the year, who is very vocally opposed to vouchers and standing up for public schools. So more and more you're going to see basically what's going on, and this is at every level of government, is the foxes are raiding the hen house. They're not guarding the hen house, they're raiding the hen house. So, you've got the foxes that are been elected to protect these hens that are now turning around and raiding them and coming for, every level of government, for education, for healthcare. These are people that they're like, oh, I don't believe in that, so I'm going to go become the government so that I can dismantle it. That's what they are.
It makes no sense to me, especially for the school board candidates to be running for an office to sit on the board of an entity you seek to destroy.
Yeah, and your kids aren't even in the schools.
I mean, can you imagine from a corporate standpoint, someone says, yes, I want to be on your board, and oh, by the way, I found somebody to raid the company and sell it off.
That's it.
It's nuts. It's nuts to me. And also, for people who are listening who don't understand what Williamson County and the schools mean, basically the county is extremely affluent. I suppose the richest in the state.
Yep.
One of the richest in the country. The schools are rated the best everywhere.
Why are we messing with this?
Yes, and I will give much credit to the people who decided some years back. Some credit, not much credit, but let's build a county that around the very best schools in the whole state, and then people will move here.
That's right, exactly what's going on.
And now that was a lot of white flight, and we know what happens with that, but it worked, and they built the best schools, and we have wonderful companies headquartered here. And, even students who come from less advantaged families get to take advantage of a fabulous education, public education, parks, activities, everything you could possibly want to raise a family, we have right here. And yet they're seeking to destroy that.
Well, what happens is they make the case against public schools as a general idea. Right? They'll say, oh, public schools are indoctrinating your kids. Public schools are doing this. Public schools are doing that. And people go, oh, yeah, they probably are somewhere else. But when you say, are they doing that at your school? No, I love my public school. I love my teacher. Right. So like Williamson County folks will be voting for those ideas that public schools are doing this thing. Meanwhile, they love their public school. They love their teacher. It's not going on here.
No.
These are not leftist indoctrination centers here in Williamson County. Anybody can walk into, my kid's elementary school or public schools or middle schools and realize these teachers are not doing the things that you're saying. You're vilifying librarians, educators, people who care about these kids.
That really is heartbreaking, isn't it?
Right. And I think that's what happened with the voucher argument is it actually broke through like, wait a minute. They're coming after my school.
Right.
And so we need that to happen, not just with the voucher argument, but with all of the arguments around education.
Exactly. I had a conversation with a friend the other day who's very, very conservative. And I asked her, I said, well, there's a teacher that lives on your street, right? And she said, oh, yeah, Miss So-and-so. And I said, do you really think that she gets in her car every morning and drives to the school to convince a child to become gay
yeah, right.
or become transgender,
right.
or she's grooming? And, as a criminologist, that grooming word, just the use of it infuriates me because technically what that means, is something so much worse than I think what people have become to think it means. But
right.
I mean, technically it means that you befriend a child, befriend their family, gain a relationship with a child so that you can then molest the child. That's
Right.
what really grooming is. And
Right.
so when people are calling other people groomers, that's a trigger for me. Talk about being triggered. So if I hear someone do that, I might call them a jackass like Jack Johnson does. But, it's a very interesting situation here in Williamson County. And, for me, then I spend part of my life is in a more rural county, as I said, in Marshall County, and I see completely different issues. And I do wonder if a legislator like a Todd Warner, is the county suffering in other ways because he has gone against what the governor wants?
What do you mean?
Well,
You mean
I know
they're retaliating against the county?
Well, I know, for example, there's a situation right now in Marshall County, for example, where there's a water treatment plant in Lewisburg. That water treatment plant can only treat so much water. It's built for so much water. And it's currently doing that barely. Some days, not so well. In order to build a new plant, a loan has to be approved. The loan won't be approved until the state gives the plant the authority to get more water from the Duck River. There is more water to be had. The state won't do that. Therefore, the plant can't grow, and now there are no more building permits being issued.
Are you saying this is retaliation for Todd Warner being against Governor Lee's vouchers?
I'm just asking.
Well, that would be a story.
That would be a story.
Yeah, I will certainly look into that.
I mean, and I wonder if there are instances like that going on.
It sounds like the kind of thing that absolutely would go on.
Doesn't
so it doesn't
though?
shock me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't it though? Yeah. Doesn't it though? Yes. So we've hit on a lot of topics. One topic that I always like to discuss with people because I'm interested in all things criminology, core civic.
Yeah.
What in the world are we doing?
Well,
how much money do you think they're pumping into our political system?
Oh, well, I mean, that obviously, yes, they've bought and paid for the entire Republican supermajority. And as a result, they get contracts from the state and they want a crackdown they want more incarceration. We're like one of the most incarcerated places on earth. It's obviously not causing our crime number to come down, but
clearly not.
They think the answer is more incarceration. So now they're getting the laws changed to put more people in jail for longer, which will fill their pockets. And the people that are passing those laws are the ones that they pay to put in office. So it's this cycle of enrichment that is done on the backs of mostly black and brown people, but generally poor people in this state. And and now something like their CEO Damon Heininger might run for governor or something like that.
Oh, that's the rumor.
All that kind of ugliness. I think one thing that I think people should know about that is it's in our Constitution that you can only have one private prison. So they have 4. And so how do they get around that? Their contracts are with the counties.
Right.
So the state gives money to the counties to give to them. That's their way. That's the loophole of having 4 private prisons in Tennessee when our state constitution says we're only allowed to have 1. To me, that sounds like something along the lines of money laundering and is completely unacceptable. And someone should probably sue over that, honestly, because that does not seem right. It's in our constitution, 1 private prison. And so on top of that, Core Civic has gotten audit after audit that shows how horribly they're doing. They're not living up to their end of the bargain.
Not at all.
Abuse inside the prisons, people dying. And after these audits, they'll have these hearings in the state government and you'll think, oh, well, surely now they're going to do something about the contract. Nope. Rubber stamp, extended for 5 years every single time. So, private prisons is a really ugly thing in general, especially in Tennessee, where we have, I think, the 9th highest incarceration rate in the entire world.
Yes, exactly. And as you said, obviously, if incarceration worked, we wouldn't have any crime.
It would be the safest place on earth. Exactly.
You would think. You would think. And I'm interested, too, and I don't know enough about it yet to really have a conversation about it, but I will. Williamson County is getting ready to build a new jail, and it's going to be huge. I'm not opposed to a new jail for some reasons if they do some of the things with the jail they've said they're going to do, which would be, for example, have a special juvenile justice program where they help these kids actually not begin the cycle of repeated incarcerations, et cetera. But I do wonder if there might be some tie-in to Core Civic with that in the future.
I think, generally speaking, you're along the right lines if you're questioning the way things work in this state, and especially in this county. I mean, we're in the belly of the beast in Williamson County for sure. This is the power seat. This is where most of the money is. So, I feel like things don't go down in Williamson County without somebody, filling their pockets.
We actually have I know at least of one very high up core civic executive that lives in Franklin. Let's talk a little bit about Gloria's race. Any advice?
Well, advice for Gloria. I mean, Gloria knows what she's doing. Thrilled that she's doing it. I think, to me, the biggest thing right now is to do everything she can to get on a stage next to Marcia so that people can really see the contrast in a debate or 2 or 3 or 5. Marcia debated Bredesen when she ran against him 6 years ago. It's time for her to do it again. Haggerty ducked Marquita. Lee ducked Jason Martin. And we were not as vocal about that at the time as we probably could have been. To me, the pressure needs to be put on the media because Marcia's just going to run as far as she can and she's going to hide. She hasn't done a town hall in 7.5 years. We know what she's going to do. The media should say to her, here's when the debates are. If you don't show up, there's going to be an empty podium. They did it in Georgia. John Ossoff had an empty podium next to him when David Perdue wouldn't debate him. And I really think that would send a clear message. So, if they try to do the thing that they did with Jason Martin, where they said, oh, we're going to just sit down Governor Lee for an interview and then we'll talk to you, Gloria should say no. She should say no to that. She should say, no, we're doing a debate or nothing, and you need to have an empty podium next to them. And so to me, people need to be reaching out to the Tennessean, to Fox Nashville, WKRN, David Plaza specifically, who tends to be the moderator in a lot of these things. And the media needs to say to Marcia, show up or the podium will be empty.
I would love to see that. I would also like to see a Megan Barry, Mark Green.
I mean, I'd like to see, look, I would be saying this if the Democrat were the favorite in the race.
Right,
This is not a partisan thing. We need to hear from the candidates.
We do.
Regardless of party. So Republicans should be calling on Marcia to debate also. I think absolutely Megan and Mark Green, we should see them in every race, but we're not going to see them in any race. I think Steve Cohen should debate.
Yes.
I said this about Cooper when it was him. So people deserve to hear from the candidates. She should have if she really thinks we have Gloria has no chance, then what does she have to worry about? Stand up there, debate. And actually, by the way, when she debated Bredesen 6 years ago, she did okay. It wasn't a disaster for her.
Oh, she knows her talking points.
Right, yeah. So, it's not like she's going to get up there and fumble all over herself. And I remember Bredesen was not as tough on her as kind of we wanted him to be. So, I think Gloria should be hammering that every chance she gets. Obviously, she can't do it all. Other people need to be talking about it for her. But to me, that's a big deal. That's a way that, if there's going to be a needle mover moment, it's probably going to be on a debate stage.
Well, that's a good point. Good point. Do you think any seats are going to flip in the Tennessee House?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know how many, but, voter data and polling data is not really my specialty. I'm more of a go ask the questions kind of guy. I'm not like a data expert, but from what I've heard, the places where the races are closest are going to be Clarksville with Allie Phillips, Murfreesboro with Luis Mata, and then I think there's a couple in Memphis, Jesse Huseth, and I think the Gabby Salinas race, but I think Gabby should be okay. So I think those are the big ones. Maybe Shondell might have, might make closer than people might think. I think Karen Reynolds maybe has a chance in Clarksville for Bill Powers' Senate seat. So those are the places where I would be looking for the movement to happen. But generally speaking, I think it's good that we have so many people running.
I do too. So we're about done here, but we can't finish without talking about Andy Ogles.
Oh yeah.
How bad do you think he's got to mess up before he really loses?
I would have thought that happened a long time ago. I mean, the guy is such a liar, and I just don't think that's what this state is about. But he keeps winning. They don't seem to care. The thing about him saying that he went to Vanderbilt or saying he was an economist or saying he was in law enforcement or fought sex trafficking, I thought
none of that is
resume
true.
Stuff, I thought all that was going to really hurt him. And then now, obviously the campaign finance stuff, which he's completely full of it. He knew exactly what he was doing. He gave himself a $300,000 loan by just writing it on a piece of paper. And that's a crime. That's an election fraud. Like,
it is a crime.
I would think that if I did that, somebody would come knocking on my door and I'd have real hell to pay. So, I don't know if this FBI search is going to amount to anything. Hopefully Merriam has a real chance here. I don't know, but I really am disappointed in this district.
I am too. And I think a lot of people don't understand, exactly what Andy Ogles was trying to do. But, I feel certain that the scam that he's trying to pull has been pulled before. We just didn't know it.
He pulled it.
Yeah.
He's in office.
But it hasn't really come to fruition yet, because what I think is what Merriam has done a video about, and I think this is how he really wanted it to work, because he's a grifter, is that, he would put that down on paper that he had the $300,000. Then he would get matching donations from various groups. And then he would be seen as a legitimate candidate. And then when it all came to fruition, he would then be able to pay himself back money he never gave. So he actually would make $300,000 on the deal, because a candidate can pay themselves back a loan to their campaign. When there's money left, they can pay themselves back, or they can just pay themselves back when they've collected a lot of money.
So just to be clear, you're saying that he would say he gave himself the loan, then he'd raise, let's say, $1 million.
And pay himself back.
And then he'd say, all right, I'm paying myself this loan back that I never gave myself.
Absolutely. They pay themselves back all the time.
If he did that, to me, then he'd be in jail.
You would hope, but
so the fact that he actually never got that money back and now can just be like, whoopsie, erase.
Exactly.
Maybe what keeps him out of jail.
And what made what he did stand out to people is that he did not have the visible means to give himself $300,000. So one must ask oneself then, and this is, where my crime hat comes on, how many politicians who do have the means to give themselves $300,000 have done that and paid themselves back money they never gave?
How many of these guys are using their campaigns as money laundering operations?
Of course.
That's the question.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a good question.
And I believe that's what his whole end goal was.
Well, I would say look around for the people who gave themselves big loans.
Yes, exactly.
Because I didn't give myself a loan when I ran.
But here's another wrinkle, and I think you and I might have talked about this off, privately, but we do have a candidate in Williamson County, Gabrielle Hanson, who ran for mayor. And yeah, I know. And that was just a real mess. It was an SS. I won't say exactly what I'm thinking. But when it all came down to it, her campaign finance papers, which are public, you can view those online. Anyone can do it right now. They're a mess. And there is a lot of shady business that went on. There's a huge amount of money that's unaccounted for. But our wonderful state legislature has made a law that if a citizen wants to complain about campaign finance violation, they no longer can do that to the state. They have to go to the district attorney in the county where it occurred if it's a local office. So then we have to go to a district attorney's office who was appointed by the governor of the state, and the paperwork proving the irregularities sits there months and months and months. And it's very hard for a regular citizen to get anything done about it.
Yeah, and that's how this state works.
And it's a very clear violation, And so I'm surprised that the Andy Ogles situation got as far as it did. That's a good thing. And I think it's because the FBI was the one who
But our Murray County Holler was talking about that 3 years ago.
Yes, I know.
Like, they were all over that and would constantly be sending it to me like, when is something going to happen with this? And at a certain point I gave up, and then this happened recently.
Part of me sort of wishes the FBI had just waited until he repaid himself.
Yeah, well, maybe they were.
Because I want to see the perp walk, and I wonder, is he going to wear a bathrobe? Uh-huh. Has that become what we do here now? Yeah, Cassida's bathrobe. Yeah.
Where's that guy
he now? Probably stole from the Marriott or something.
Pretty sure he
clearly
did.
A hotel bathrobe.
Yes.
Lord. Well, this has been fun. I always like to end by just asking my guest about the future. if you could interview anybody for an hour, who would it be?
If I could interview anybody for an hour?
Yeah.
It can be anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously Kamala is the one that comes to mind right now. Kamala, yeah. I mean, Tennessean, does it have to be?
Yeah, name someone in Tennessee.
Name someone in Tennessee. Okay. Bill Lee.
Wow. That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it?
That would be great.
I would have a good time with that.
At what point does he become a lame duck? Is there...
He already is.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think.
I think so, too.
I think he's in trouble. And that was the highlight of my month, was when Trump called him a rhino multiple times for seemingly no reason.
Isn't it funny when they eat their own? That's just so crazy. Why did he do that? I mean, and I know it was the Harshbarger.
It was the Harshbarger thing,
thing.
but I think the thing that about that was it was a window into a way of looking at things that I think a lot of Democrats don't understand exists, which is Republicans on the right, the far right, they think Governor Lee and Jack Johnson and Cameron Sexton are like Democrats. Like, they think they're not extreme at all on education, guns, LGBTQ folks. Like, they think they are basically Democrats when it comes to that stuff.
Shocking.
And so they're the ones that call Governor Lee a rhino all the time. And Trump doesn't know Governor Lee's politics. Like, he's using that word. Someone's putting that word in his ear. And that word is a window into how they view these people. And it's where we're heading if we don't pump the brakes.
And I will tell you an example of that locally that happened just last week. So the Williamson County Republican Party had a caucus for a commissioner race because it's a special race because the commissioner in District 10 moved. And so that seat is open. It will happen in November, so there's no time for a primary, so each party could do a caucus. They did a caucus. And they had two people that were running. One is a very far right-wing extremist, extremely far right-wing. He speaks out publicly at many of the meetings, very far-fetched views on things. The other one was a woman who has actually in the past been the chair of the Republican Party. She attended January 6th. She is a huge Trump follower. They did not vote for her because she was not a, quote, true Republican. And so now their candidate is Bill Petty, who is very, very far to the right.
Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to be a true Republican these days? Sadly, I think what it means is that you refuse to acknowledge that Democrat won the election last time around and that you're willing to do whatever it takes this time around. I'm pretty nervous about where we're headed.
Yeah, and I mean, and she didn't win by just a little bit. You know, she won by lost by a pretty big margin. So that was very upsetting. And I just, I long for a time when we can actually have debates and talks about policy issues with people who are reasonable and dealing with the truth, as you said. Mm-hmm. And so I would wish for a better Republican Party. I truly, truly would.
Amen.
Well, this has been fun. I really appreciate you being here. Tell people how they can become engaged with the Holler. And by the way, the Holler is supported by the readers. Tell people how they can get a hold of the Holler or where they can see it and how they can also donate to the efforts.
Sure. I appreciate that. Well, tnholler.com is our website. That's where our donation link is. We are supported by our readers, our supporters. We don't put anything behind a paywall. We don't have corporate sponsors. We are user supported, and we really appreciate that. These hats, like the one I'm wearing, $10 a month or more gets you a hat. And that's really the easiest way to support us. Also, we do a once or twice weekly email blast that really catches people up on what's going on with links and videos. So tnholler.com is where you can subscribe to that email blast. And then we have, our social media feeds on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. We're everywhere. We also have hollering all across the state, in Knoxville, Murray County, Clarksville, Memphis. So we have 10 of those. So, we try to be wherever we can. And, most of our content and our stories come from the people. So if you see anything going on in your community, you know where to find us.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right.
And that's my son's voice.
That's okay. We're very busy, both of us. Well, thank you so much for being here. I want to ask the listeners to subscribe, share, rate, and review, and go check out the Holler and also make a donation to the Holler because Justin and his crew are out there doing great things. They're asking the questions that need to be asked. Even when they're not answered, they're asking the questions. Everybody have a great day, and thank you for listening to Blue Lip.